Welcome everybody. We are on site at Founder World in San Francisco. Joining me in the studio is Max. He is a former Googler, multiple time founder, and currently working on Alt School. Max, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm actually a former Googler twice.
Twice?
Then I came back and then I left again.
So let's start with that story then.
So I had done a startup in college basically, and just kind of got my ass handed to me and said, okay, there's a lot of things that I need to know before I do that again. And so one of them was, I wanted to work for a really great, awesome company that modeled for me the kind of company I wanted to build.
Right.
And so after working for an amazing company in Europe and finishing my MBA, I went to Google and was part of this kind of small corporate strategy group and got that, crazy itch to start something, not least because an amazing person was finishing a PhD and I wanted to start a company with them forever. And so I did that, and then Google ended up buying this startup, Aardvark, like 2.5 years later, and so I ended up back at Google.
Wow. And now left Google again to do Alt School.
That's right.
So tell us about that.
So it's been about 2.5 years, was running the personalization team prior to leaving Google and got to work on things like Google Now and just really felt like there was a role for personalization to play in the broader world and education specifically. And I'm a parent, I had a 2-year-old daughter at the time and was very much thinking about school and future school and just, when you have that Google experience, you are trained to think about the world in a certain way, which is around scale and continuous improvement. And that's at odds with what I saw in the education space where schools are structurally resistant to change. There aren't the kind of resources to really do a kind of R&D enablement of some transformative new model. And so that kind of possessed me and a number of other folks from Google and then amazing child-centered educators that we partnered with. We've been kind of working on that journey of how do you really transform the ecosystem in which people start and run schools, starting with a set of schools that we operate ourselves that have a level of technology enablement that is kind of unheard of. So, we have 150 people working for Alt School, 50 of them are educators, and 50 of them are engineers, many of them from places like Google, and that kind of one-to-one ratio is something you don't see.
Yeah, for sure. And so I noticed when I was reading about it that it said you were able to get a level of personalization without resulting to kind of screen learning. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I think that the most important technologies for a classroom should be invisible from the classroom for the most part, in the same way that the most important technologies from driving aren't so obvious when you get behind the wheel of a car. There are things that go into the safety and the GPS and the testing and eventually to things like the car steering itself, with Tesla and ones that will follow. And so similarly, we want to think about how do we set up that classroom to be most dynamic, to be most responsive to what each child in that classroom needs in terms of what classroom they're in to begin with what educators and what peers, and what kind of curriculum they're pursuing and extracurriculars, and then down to, having each child be able to be on a different trajectory each week with 20 to 25 different activities in their playlist that all can be assessed in almost real time, where those playlist items should be happening primarily offline, but there should be a digital representation, there should be an interoperability between classrooms, and there should be a level of transparency and rigor that's very hard to accomplish in a scaled way without relying on technologies. In this case, technologies you need to build yourself from the ground up.
Right. Well, that's really cool. So you said you were running schools. How many children have you educated so far?
How many children we educate? We have 330 students in our schools today. We have, we've only been around for 2.5 years. We started with lower and upper elementary, that first pilot year, with just a one-room schoolhouse. And then we expanded to include middle school the next year, and we literally only had one kid graduate that year. We intended to have none and give ourselves a little more time to graduate a student, but this guy Zev came along and was just too awesome, and we said, okay, we're going to admit you, and it was a good call. And so we'll have more and more kids in the years to follow.
And so this sounds like right now you're working off of your own kind of high-touch model. Like you said, you have to own the ecosystem with engineering and the educators. How do you see this kind of rolling out to a public school system in the future, or do you?
Yeah, so we think of a kind of a three-phased approach, where phase one is we're the only inhabitants of this transformatively different ecosystem that doesn't start out that transformatively, but we build and we iterate and we invest, and we start chasing that kind of hockey stick curve that has a long flat part, and we're the only client of that ecosystem. It's only our schools that exist in this kind of old school world, right? But over time, and we think we're maybe halfway in that 5-year journey to where we can start to invite other people in that ecosystem, and you'll see charter schools, public schools, Montessori schools, international baccalaureate schools start in this new universe that makes it much easier to operate a great school. Today, it's way too hard to start and run a bad school, let alone a good school. And you look at something like Montessori, which is probably the best out-of-the-box approach we have for lower elementary. It's over 100 years old. There's no technology enablement. There's no significant network effects. And we want to create this ecosystem, which in phase 2 allows more and more people to start more and more diverse schools that still meet that high bar of what a school today should be in terms of being personalized, in terms of being iterative, in terms of being data-driven, in terms of using technology in the right way, not to replace relationship-driven real-world learning, but to kind of superpower it. And eventually, over the long term, we hope to kind of move to the third phase where we represent a viable option for existing schools and school systems, which will educate the majority of kids for the foreseeable future to do things in a different way, in a different place. In the same way as, after 20 years, from 95 to 2015, this internet ecosystem now represents the way that even the most traditional media players and content providers increasingly operate. And we want a similar dynamic to take place over the next kind of decades.
That's very cool. It's like a long-tailed infiltration of the education system. That's cool. So you're at Founder World. There's like thousands of really interesting tech, entrepreneur, non-tech people here. What attracted you to this event?
So I like any opportunity to go kind of spout off to people that haven't, rammed their head into the same walls as I have. I don't think it's worth that much. I mean, at the end of the day, you learn by doing, and you learn by being alongside someone doing, and someone telling you can't really make big impact. But, I saw, I wouldn't have started Old School if I wouldn't have heard Elon Musk talk in a few individual situations. Sure. So maybe I can be the poor man's Elon Musk and talk to people that are even earlier in their career. So I like that. It's something I think is built into the startup ethos, which is you pay it forward. And so when there's a great audience, when it's very much about how do you inspire, how do you give actual tactical advice as well to kind of next generation of entrepreneurs, I want to do a certain number of those a year, and like the people organizing this event, so I'm just happy to do it.
Okay, and so you were on stage, obviously earlier, talking to potential young entrepreneurs earlier in their career. What was the message you were getting across?
So for me, the message is mostly about you want to focus on the long term. Startups tend to fail. They take a lot of time, they take a lot of money, and you want to set yourself up assuming that those things are true, which means not relying on an intelligent design, like a hunch you have and then you go as fast as you possibly can. It's to kind of use first principles, assume you're wrong, iterate, focus on acceleration, put the earliest version out there that you can and start learning as soon as possible. Be quantitatively and qualitatively user-driven. And in the earliest phases, try and weed out false positives and don't worry about false negatives. Who cares if you didn't do the thing that would have been the next billion-dollar startup? All you care about is not doing the thing that ends up being a failure.
That's cool, actually. So as you walk around here, there's all sorts of different booths, all sorts of different technologies. Is there anything particular, here or otherwise in the tech space today that gets you really excited?
Yeah, so I haven't had the chance to walk around here. I think that there are some amazing building blocks that have been put into place. So obviously things like cloud infrastructure and big data analytics are extremely interesting to me. I think that there's moving into things that allow consumer behavior. So, the proliferation of mobile payments, super interesting to me. More seamless identity, the fact that I can use my thumbprint and put in my Amazon password on a mobile site. I think that stuff is going to grease the wheels for actually a transformatively different way that we behave online. I'm now interested in, more lately, things that allow us to, in the real world, make fast progress around digital systems. So that could be anything from, Texas Instruments makes a kind of wearable chip that's very easy to play with. Intel is starting to do some really interesting things with transistors for mobile. So I think that just lowering the bar for people to get started on real world devices is especially interesting for me in a real world venture that still wants to use technology. And there's some critical kind of AI pieces that come along with that in terms of things like voice transcription. I mean, it's amazing to me that I could open up Siri or Google Now and it could basically, in this noisy room, like do a pretty good job transcribing. I want to be able to use that kind of stuff.
Very cool. And so, being a two-time Googler and obviously a tech entrepreneur, what is your favorite Google technology?
I mean, Google Search is just transformative. I think like Google Search on mobile is just amazing. Being able to give it to my daughter who expects that anything she wants to know
is there
at any time. I think she's going to become a different human being as a result. It's so cool to watch.
That's really cool. Well, thank you, Max, for joining us. It's great to have you here. And thank you guys for joining us. We're on site at Founder World in San Francisco.